Kia ora, Tiwi, and welcome to Context with me, Guy and Espiner.
And me, Corin Dan, in the studio today.
Yeah, it's nice to be with you, my brother. Now, as listeners to the program know, context is the backstory to the front page.
That's right, we take an issue making headlines today, trace its long shadow to try and figure out how we got to where we are to today.
And the catch, only one of us knows the subject we're going to be talking about.
So, we take turns, of course, being fair and balanced, folks. So, Guyan, what are you up to? What are you going to drop on me today?
Well, this is an interesting one. I'll keep you in suspense for a little bit longer by playing you this.
My kids are with her, so I don't know.
Have you attempted to contact her?
No, she's not in the country.
Do you accept that this situation could be damaging for Labour?
I hope not.
It's actually hard to listen to, isn't it?
It was hard to watch the first time, just on the raw emotional level, seeing someone well up like that was pretty real.
Yeah, it was. So that's, of course, a highly emotional Chris Hipkins speaking to media at Parliament after his ex-wife made those allegations on social media. He denied them, of course. She deleted the post, said she stood by the claims. But today, I want to look at when the personal gets political and the context of sort of political scandal in New Zealand. I don't want to go through every scandal and sort of say who was right and who was wrong, but I do think it's really interesting how the trajectory of this has changed over the years, and how the media reports and what the public appetite for it is, because I think there's quite a lot to unpack there. Neither of us are really sort of scandal merchants.
Not really, no. It probably wasn't. We were busy putting in OIAs and digging under rocks for stories. And this era of social media has just changed everything, because one of the things that, as journalists, you hear things, you go and investigate them and you try and stack them up. If they don't meet the test, they don't get reported. That's not always the case on social media. And then you get in the situation where you're reporting on something that's being said on social media because that in itself is becoming a story, which is kind of mind-boggling.
Yes, and you're also dealing with this lack of trust in the media. So when people see something on social media and then they see that the mainstream media, which has become a criticism nowadays, as though you're supposed to be out in the fringes, they think that maybe you're part of some sort of conspiracy to not report it. So you're in a real sort of
we've got some
situation.
basic tests we apply, right? We've got to make sure we can stand up a story. That's where we begin, the beginning of the process.
Yes, and whether there's actually public interest in it at all. And we'll unpick some of this. But I want to go back, as we do, as it says on the tin, we go back into history to figure out how we got to where we are now. Because in the past, if you go back many decades, there just wasn't inquiry into the lives of politicians at all. And when I was researching this, I hit upon, and I knew a little bit about Michael Joseph Savage, of course, one of New Zealand's most famous prime ministers. You must have been into many Labour Party MPs' offices. Had that photo on the wall, that picture on the wall, right? That photograph.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I'm trying to think. I had a flash of David Cunliffe when he was running to be leader of the Labour Party and sitting being interviewed, and I'm pretty sure it was a Michael Joseph Savage picture above him on the wall. I mean, a huge iconic photo.
Yeah, of course, he was the one who said that New Zealand was going to war in World War II, ushered in the welfare state and started state housing, basically hugely famous prime minister. Do you know where he was born?
I feel like it's Auckland. I don't know why.
He was born in Australia.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
He was born in Australia. They're always pinching our stuff.
Yeah. Did not know that.
I don't know if they've laid claim to him. Certainly laid claim to Russell Crowe and a few others, but maybe not Michael Joseph Savage. Of course, he died at the height of his popularity. But why I've brought him up in this conversation is that he never married, right? He lived with this couple. He boarded with them until his death, and no one ever asked. Serious players in politics and history have suggested that he was gay. And let's take a listen to this. This is from the author and political commentator Claire Robinson, who explored in her play called The Lee Letter, and here she is talking to Kim Hill.
A major theme of the play is your suggestion that Savage was gay, in the closet, and gay. Is this literary licence, or do you have evidence?
So, yes, it is a work of fiction. Let's start by saying that. But I genuinely think that if he was alive today, Savage would self-identify as being gay. He couldn't be gay in 1935 because under the Crimes Act, buggery was an illegal act, and he could be flogged or imprisoned or whatever. So, simply not possible. But never married, never had any
Funny he never married, as
never
they
married
used to
at
say.
all. Never
Right.
had any relationships with women.
And of course, Claire Robinson is a pretty serious player, and knows
spoke to her on Q&A many times.
knows a lot about politics and history. And the point really I'm trying to get at here by raising that, I don't care one way or the other who's gay or not, but he would never have been asked, would he? It was just, okay, so he's a confirmed
definitely
bachelor,
not.
lifelong bachelor. But you wouldn't get away with that today, would you? Because there'd be scrutiny about, and the women's magazines or feature magazines that would want to do stories on you and your family.
Want to know about.
They want to
know about a leader's personal life.
They do.
It seems to be part of the deal. That whatever that is, they want to. Because it is about understanding the character. There is an argument there, right? You've got to try and if you're going to be the leader of the country, you want to know a little bit about who they are. So I guess that goes with the territory. There might be are there some politicians who are more so than others, that are more open than others?
Yeah,
pretty hard when your PR person comes to you and says, "Hey, the woman, Women's Weekly or whatever wants to do this feature. It's going to be a soft interview.
Yeah.
You get to just sit around and change your clothes
you
5
get
times.
that in the media, don't you?
You do.
You
do.
The publicity department says,
You certainly do if you're doing breakfast TV. I've done it a few times.
That's right. So I wanted to sort of trace this back a little bit because, pre-television, as you say, there are more places to hide, and these things do change. In the 1960s, there was a bit of a pivotal moment in terms of political scandal. Have a listen to this. You won't know who's speaking, but see if you can perhaps guess the scandal.
Let's recognize it what it is, a scandal. A great party is not to be brought down because of a squalid affair between a woman of easy virtue and a proved liar.
It's pretty hard. I'll give you... So this is Britain.
Yeah, I was going to say, it
sounded
sounded to be UK. What's something affair? I don't know. Portofillo? Or
you got it.
Profrito. Yeah, I can't say.
Profumo.
That's it. Yeah.
Profumo Affair.
Yep.
So this is a big scandal.
I'm sure I've seen a Sunday night drama about it or something.
Yeah, well, it's good. There's some good material there. So this was it's John Profumo. He was 46 years old. He was a secretary for war in Harold Macmillan's government, and he was married, but he had this affair with this 19-year-old model, Christine Keeler, beginning in 1961. And there was huge interest in this. I suppose a little more public interest because it was revealed that Keeler, the woman he was having an affair with, may have been simultaneously involved with a Soviet naval attaché, and there was some...
I was going to say, I would have thought that would have raised a few worries at the spy agencies.
There was a possible national security risk. But when you think about it, even up till the 60s, there was still almost a cone of silence with the media, especially in America too. If you look at JFK. Yeah, exactly.
Having numerous affairs, right?
Yes.
But none of them were being reported on, so to speak.
That's exactly right. So Kennedy came to office in 1960, and he had many guests to the White House.
Yeah.
Even it's been suggested, and seems likely true, that Marilyn Monroe was potentially among them. But the big titans of the media at that time, Ben Bradley, who was editor of the Washington Post, and they were very close with him. They knew about many of these affairs, yet they simply they didn't report it. Seemed to be off limits.
Why? What would be their argument? If you had Ben Bradley sitting here, what would be his argument that it wasn't material to the running of the country?
Yes, I think so. At its best, that would be their argument. I suppose the slightly more cynical view is that they Well, there was a bit of a boys' club,
Yeah.
and a bit of an
It would have
sort
been
of
a
an
boys'
elite
club.
and also they would have been worried about access and about losing it if they did that. I don't know. I mean, we've both worked in politics and at close quarters with these MPs and going out drinking with MPs and things. I know did that.
People are allowed to have messy lives, aren't they?
Yeah.
What's the public interest? Where does that bit come in?
Well, this is exactly the question in just about every one of these cases that you face, isn't it? Like, why is this particularly a story? And that's the call you have to make, don't you?
And it is the life of a politician. I mean, seeing it from the other side as a press gallery journo, I mean, it can be, you can see that it can be for some a lonely existence in the sense, and difficult with families because they're away from they are away from their families 3 days a week for 20 odd weeks of the year or whatever it is, 30 weeks, and that's just their requirement at the house. Then they are up and down the country. Then they're going to be doing their electorate offices. Their lives are going to be very difficult if they've got children and a family. It is not going to be easy. And there will be many politicians over the years whose private lives have suffered. Many.
Yeah, absolutely. So, looking back at this, it's from about the 1990s where you see the mainstream media really focusing on private lives, and the British tabloids are absolutely rampant by this point. You never did neither of us worked for a tabloid, but I worked for the Sunday Times and the Times of London for a little while in Wapping, and that's the big Murdoch complex. And we had the News of the World before that was closed down. Yeah. And even during my time there, I mean, even the Sunday Times and the Times, which are very serious newspapers, they still had a pretty aggressive, hustling sort of culture. I never forget when I was working at the Sunday Times, there was a guy who'd come over to you and say, if you're ever trying to find an unlisted number, we've got a guy at BT, and they'd pay this guy at BT to give them unlisted phone numbers. So it wasn't
the Murdoch influence was massive in the world media.
Yeah.
I mean, with the Post and the Sun and everything, and his approach was definitely that tabloid approach.
Yeah.
He changed the game, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And then as we get to the end of the 1990s, came this American bombshell.
But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work for the American people. Thank you.
That's extraordinary to hear that, isn't it?
Yeah, remember the wagging of the finger?
How old was she? I mean, what? That just appalling, that whole thing.
I think she was about 19. She was very young.
And she became the villain.
Yeah, and in a position of, she was an intern.
How did that happen?
Yeah, extraordinary. And again, if you listen to his words there, I don't need to spell it out for anyone because I think everyone knows what actually happened. But, this technical truth, possibly, that I did not have sexual relations with this woman. So that was from, and I want to talk a little bit about, your approach to handling scandals as a politician and what gets you out of it and what we can see are some of the more successful strategies on dealing with it. Because that was from January 1998. And, of course, it didn't end there. The media and others kept digging. I mean, the dirty laundry, quite literally, I think it was a blue dress, to be precise, was handed over. And in August 1998, we finally get this.
Indeed, I did have a relationship with Miss Lewinsky that was not appropriate. In fact, it was wrong. It constituted a critical lapse in judgment and a personal failure on my part for which I am solely and completely responsible. I misled people, including even my wife. I deeply regret that.
Yeah,
wow.
I think that audio is from a recording where people were watching it in a bar or some public place or something. But I mean, so
so he couldn't. That's what he should have said at the outset.
Exactly.
But he couldn't because he was hanging on to power.
Yep, exactly. And I think you often find that they do say that, don't they, often in these stories, that it's often the cover-up that's worse than the initial crime. And that's when you sort of, you lose trust. And I think, having looked back at a number of these in preparing this episode, I found that in terms of a response from a politician, that was the key mistake, not being upfront fully about what's gone on. People's tolerance is quite high,
because people have messy lives.
Yeah.
Everyone does.
I think a lot of people looking at Chris Hipkins, I mean, we'll perhaps we can end with this, but would have seen, maybe half the country or more has been through a relationship breakup, a marriage breakup, kids involved, and I looking at Chris Hipkins doing that stand-up, and he looked really human and vulnerable, and I thought that for some people that might have played out actually relatively well.
Because it was real and it was authentic
real.
and it was his real self. And if it sounds cliched, but if he's offering up his truth and is trying to being as authentic as he can, and that will, of course, that has to respond with people. Absolutely. So yeah, and it is interesting, isn't it? Because if you've got that, you can imagine the pressure that Clinton would have been under, but he probably regrets that for the rest of his, obviously what he did, he should regret, but the way he handled it, it's interesting to hear those two statements.
Yeah. Okay, let's have a little look at some of how local politicians have handled political scandals. You'll remember this one.
Yeah, what I did is that during the time that I was staying in hotels around the country, from time to time I definitely watched blue movies. Although I paid them back, it should never have gone on my ministerial card. It was personal expenditure, and I offer no excuse.
There was a pattern of watching blue movies, though. I mean, sometimes you watch several in one day.
Well, I haven't looked at it that closely, but I offer no excuses. I obviously lost the plot.
So, yeah. That's Shane Jones. Now, that was interesting, wasn't it? You were probably in the gallery at that point. I was certainly in the press gallery as a political reporter at TVNZ at that point, and, it was the John Key government, and they had, rather helpfully, released under the OAA all of these ministerial credit card statements, and people were unpicking them, and they found this pattern of 1995 or something at the Heritage Hotel, and Shane Jones was pinged for it. But I have to say, and I remember going to interview him, that was Barry Soper, I think you could hear. I remember going to interview Jones and walking up thinking he's gone, there's no way he can survive this, and walking out of the interview with him thinking he's definitely going to survive. Yeah. Because it was a masterclass in
owning it. He just owned it. He said it. He didn't try and blame anyone else. That's key, isn't it?
It is.
Don't blame anybody else. Don't apologise if you've caused offence. That's the classic, isn't it?
A lot of those, isn't there?
Apologise for what you did. He took ownership for it, and he's had to pay for that. He got a lot of stick and was been the butt of many jokes.
Yes, but he's got
not now, though. Actually,
now.
When you think about it,
this
now,
would be. He probably won't thank us for this, but
no, he won't.
He won't. But it was definitely a story because he had put it on a ministerial credit card, which at its best is just really, really poor judgment.
Bad judgment. I think he was a big high flyer back then too. He was a guy who was earmarked as a potential Prime Minister.
Yes, and just to remind people, he was a Labour minister
MP.
at that.
He'd come from the Waitangi Fisheries Commission,
right.
wasn't it?
That's right. Yes.
He'd done very well there.
Yep.
And had big raps. And we know what an orator he is in terms of his ability, fluency, incredible te reo Māori, and likes to sound his own voice, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, he does. He does. But again, it seems to be that strategy, doesn't it? If you fully own it, then a lot of people will go, yeah, well,
I suppose it's because people can actually make a judgment. And for some, that may have meant that you're scratched morally in their book. Yeah. Some people might have decided no, I don't want that person. But most people will make a judgment and they'll say, well, people make mistakes. Has he truly owned it? And then they can make that judgment. But if they're not clear, or if they feel like somebody's not being upfront or not really being honest about it, then they can't make that judgment. You can't tell. I guess it's a character thing.
Yeah.
And I actually think character So, there's always this debate in politics, isn't there, about, come election time, you're at the barbecue and somebody will be saying, why don't people just vote on policy, and it's all about the policies that matter. And yes, of course the policies matter, but surprisingly, I actually think the personality matters a lot too, and character.
Character matters a lot. We're humans, and we look to people with leadership and values and how they will respond in a certain situation.
And not everyone wants to sit down and read a 50-page policy on climate change. They want to know that the person who's going to do that is someone that they can trust and that they can understand and recognise their character. And that's their shortcut to do that.
Yeah, and often the public are quite smart to do that as well, because often, it's a bit like having a battle plan that doesn't survive the first bullet, because often when governments come in, they'll want to do their policy program, but it's
going to be derailed.
It will always be derailed. For Key, it was the GFC and the Christchurch earthquakes. For Jacinda Ardern, it was COVID. Chris Luxon has found himself in this position
100%.
too with the Iran war, and I think it was in that interview you did with him. He copped a lot of flack because at a time of war, you're looking to your leader and go, well, what are you about? What's your position? And he's struggled to articulate.
Yeah, you're forced to go back to your right back to your values, right back to who you are. You can't deflect with a policy or something. You've got to just react as a human being, and other humans will react to that.
Yeah. So full disclosure. Okay. Here's another one. I'm sure you'll know who this is, but see if you can tell me roughly what happened, what the context was, and when it occurred.
The scrutiny of my family has become unbearable, frankly. They don't deserve the degree of scrutiny that they've suffered from, and I have a duty to them to protect them from that. That is my first duty, and always has been. The second reason is I do think that if I continue as co-leader, I will hinder the success of the kaupapa.
Yeah, that Matiria Ture.
Yes.
And she, in a speech, I think it was at a Green Party conference, wasn't it? She told a story of when she was a student and she did something that constituted benefit fraud. Is that?
Yes.
I don't want to defame her in any way.
No, that's absolutely
but she
right.
basically said that in the context of as a young woman at university, and then it sort of spiralled out of control, didn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right. And she resigned there in that clip. This is the 2017, lead up to the 2017 election. You had Jacinda Mania and full flight, remember? And speculation about whether the Greens would be in cabinet or not. And actually, Jacinda Ardern, I think, was quite ruthless with her, wasn't she? She was saying she wouldn't be in her cabinet, remember?
Yeah.
At that point. But
because did people start sort of digging around then?
That's exactly
when it started
right.
to become problematic.
And this is the problem again. So, my advice to politicians out there would be, if you're going to come forward with a revelation, you're pretty much going to have to make sure it's all out there, because, clearly this was a woman who had been under pressure, and she was using this as an example of how hard it is for people on benefits, and I get that.
Yes, totally.
And
that's right.
Were real concerns. But, I think there were some fairly salient facts that were left out of her narrative, like we all do to some degree when you try to tell the best version of history for yourself. But, if you're going to drop a bomb like that, you really have to make sure you know what the next story and the next story and the next story is, right? Because, as we've seen from some of these other scandals, partial revelation is really going to come back.
That was a really significant admission too, because from my memory, the Greens were flying high at that point.
They were.
They were way up in sort of 13-14%.
Yes,
and then poor old James Shaw basically had to run the election campaign on his own and scramble to get back over 5.
That's right. And they only just made it. So that was I just thought an interesting example of what happens when you sort of tell a little bit of the story and then some of the rest of it creeps
that's really
out,
interesting.
and you lose control over it. So there's a number of things that journalists take into account when they are going to do these stories or not, isn't it? As you said before, when you're a political journalist, you hear things. I remember one time when I was political editor at TVNZ, and I was sitting in the press gallery and the landline phone rang, and picked it up, and it was the wife of a prominent politician. I won't say any more than that. A prominent politician. And she said, "You've got the scoop. I'm going to tell you that this person has been having an affair." And I I said to her, go and ring one of the women's magazines. I don't care. I thought about it in my brain. I thought, is that a story that I'm interested in? It ain't a yarn. I'm not interested.
Not unless there was. What about if there was some hypocrisy involved? Then it starts to get there has to be some it's that public interest test, doesn't it? But if it's just people having a messy life, I agree with you. I wouldn't have run it either.
It doesn't. Yeah,
I wouldn't have been bothered either.
Yeah. And one of the other big things that journalists have to take into consideration is defamation law, right? Have you ever been threatened with the?
Yeah, I've had a couple of little
couple of skirmishes.
Yeah, there was things got pretty heated over Orovida with Judith Collins. She got pretty fiery. I'm not sure whether I got any. It ever went past a few sort of like comments, social media comments and things, but. It's
Bob Jones
not a fun place to be, is it?
Bob Jones sued me once.
Yeah, that's right.
With the Sunday Star Times. He also threatened to punch me out. I think
he can't sue you now.
No, he can't, and you can't defame the dead. Not that I'm going to go after you now, Sir Bob.
No.
But yeah, and I also there was a letter tabled in Parliament by Brian Henry threatening to sue me and Nick Smith for $30 million over our coverage of the New Zealand Affairs Foundation, which is it's kind of heavy. And New Zealand defamation law is pretty strict, really, isn't it? I mean, effectively for people, you have to be able to prove, and the burden of proof is on you as the journalist to prove that everything you have said is true. So it's not good enough to say, well, we've heard this, we've got his denial, and we're going to run it. Unless you can prove that to be true, you're potentially in a lot of trouble, right?
Huge trouble. And that's much stricter here than in many other countries.
Especially than in America.
Yeah.
It's closer to British law, where some politicians have made quite good living suing media.
Yeah. It is. It's just scary. I mean, you've got more of a stomach for it than me by the sounds of it, having been through those two. Because that's going to be stressful.
It's frightening. I'd say definitely. There's a little more leeway with politicians, because they are there's a more of a public interest case, and there's a famous Longy Atkinson case where
that's right.
David Longy tried to sue North and South magazine about a political column that was written about him, and this dragged on for many years, and it did set a new precedent that said there was a higher bar for politicians to sue for defamation, because if there was, if you'd shown responsible and you'd shown that you were going for something in the public interest, then that would be a partial defence.
Yeah, you have to. There's satire. You start to get into areas around cartoons and sending people up and all this sort of stuff. Politicians are always going to be fair game to a degree with that, but I suppose, you've got to stack it up again. Those tests keep coming back to me when I'm, when one of those stories comes across your desk, or when you're in that space of where it's really difficult because you're convinced that you're right, and you think you've got all the boxes ticked, but there's that little bit of doubt. That's a pretty scary place to be, and the story's about to go out.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a nerve-wracking time.
Yeah. So, I mean, regardless of what some people think about the media, you simply can't just publish what you want or what you reckon. You really have to stack everything up. And again, I come back to that phrase that's used in a pejorative sense now, the mainstream media. Well, the mainstream media are subject to defamation law, to the Broadcasting Standards Authority, Media Council. If you get things wrong, or even in a way that's not balanced, you can be in
not
serious
least
trouble.
People won't talk to you again.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't have to talk to you.
No.
I mean, it's a bit harder for politicians because sometimes they do. They get grumpy with you and yell at you and call you an arrogant wokester loser, and then they do talk to you again because that's a little bit of the nature of politics. But because there's a sort of a relationship there, isn't there? But business world, for example, sometimes people need the media, but a lot of times people will be like, if you burn your trust, if you can't be a trustworthy journalist, and then why would they talk to you?
Exactly. Now, you mentioned one of the areas that journalists do see it as legitimate to go for this political scandal type story, and that you mentioned the word of hypocrisy. Take a listen to this one.
To the night's other big story, and the man who was the face of Christian politics in New Zealand for more than a decade is tonight awaiting sentence on a child sex abuse charge.
You know the newsreader, Judy Bates.
Graham Capel, was it?
It's Graham Capel.
Yeah,
it's
no.
Graham Capel. God, he got close. They got close to getting into Parliament too.
Yeah.
You know, in the 1996 election, as everyone was gathering up the first MMP election, you had the Christian Heritage Coalition, and they got 4.4%. The Christian Coalition, sorry, it was the Christian Heritage Party,
Which is a very good effort to
Yeah.
get 4% in MMP these days.
Yeah. So they nearly got to 5. But, you know, it was obvious. I mean, look, this was a serious, anything involving a child sex abuse charge is incredibly serious, obviously. But there was obvious hypocrisy because they'd made pledges like this one.
Help us turn the tide. Family, justice and choice.
So, you know, it's a pretty bad look, isn't it, when you're preaching like that, and then you get caught in one of those. But yeah, so hypocrisy is always going to be one that is going to be a red rag to the bull of journalists, isn't it?
Especially a politician if they make their name sort of, you know. And I'm sure there's examples overseas of politicians who have made their names on the family values and really perhaps been critical of gay rights and things, and then it turns out they're having an affair.
And it's quite often the case, isn't it? Doth protest too much.
Yeah. And in that case, then that starts to change the equation, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And look, it waxes and wanes, doesn't it, our coverage of this sort of stuff over the years. I mean, I think you're right that the trajectory since, you know, television, then mass market magazines and sort of tabloid culture, and now social media, the trajectory is for more disclosure. But within that, I think they wax and wane looking back at a lot of these. And some of it is about which particular media organisations have been formed on what basis and really want to go after some of these stories. Have a listen to this exchange from the early 2000s and see if you can tell me roughly what's going on here.
We published a photo that was taken in a public place of a public figure at a public event.
And you invite people to what?
And invite people to send in more detail about who was in the photo and anything else to do with Mr. Davis's contacts, because what we're doing in terms of investigating this alleged rumour is trying to work out what the background and the context to it is.
Well, it's not alleged rumour, it's a rumour.
Well, it's an alleged incident, Sean.
Okay, well, when did you first hear about the incident?
I first heard about the incident in early June.
And how many people you heard about it from?
I have had, in the last couple of weeks, every man and their dog rings up, but of course...
June, July, August, September, have you ever talked to anyone who has confirmed it firsthand or in any official way?
If we had it confirmed firsthand, Sean, it would have been published by now.
Do you know who that is?
That's Ian Wishart, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Peter Davis.
Peter Davis, Helen Clark's husband. And I looked back. I mean, I even hesitate to say it now, but this was all over even international media, and Helen Clark herself had to come out with a statement about it. It was bizarre. The claim was he gay, was the question put out, which clearly he's not. They've had a long and happy marriage. And there was a photograph taken of a man who was embracing him somehow, and the story was put in the magazine Investigate. Do you remember that magazine?
Yes.
Yeah, and so they went really hard after a number of these sort of
because they had the John Tamahiri story, where Tamahiri claims, didn't he, that he didn't know he was being taped.
Yeah, it was a long liquid lunch, I think, as Helen Clark described it. He was a cabinet minister for the Labour Party in the over that time.
I'll tell you a funny story about that.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a funny story. In fact, it's a terrible story. I don't mean funny.
This has been about, for people who don't know,
from my memory,
05, 06, 07.
So John, in that interview, he made some anti-Semitic sort of comments about the Holocaust or something, you know, that he was sick of hearing about the Holocaust or something.
He did.
Anyway, about 6 months later, or whenever it was, I went on the New Zealand embassy was being opened in Warsaw in Poland, and Helen Clark was there with Mark Sainsbury, and we took a military plane down to Krakow and went to Auschwitz, and at the Auschwitz, coming out of the concentration camp, you do the museum and things. There was a press conference with the Polish culture minister, and I don't know how, I don't know if it was me or Mark, suddenly John Tamahiri's, anti-Semitism, Holocaust remarks come up in this press conference, and Helen Clark was, reminding people of the need not to trivialise this sort of stuff.
Wow. Followed it over there.
To be fair, that was a pretty scary. Well, not scary, but just a lot of it was a horrific experience. Anyone who's been to Auschwitz.
Wow.
But yeah, John Tamahiri's from that interview, when it was one of the angles that came out of our trip, the stories.
Yeah. But when you get one particular media outlet, whatever the platform kind of is, that is really going hard on these stories, it's very difficult for other media to ignore, isn't it? You're probably like me. You see a story like that break, and it turns your stomach, and you're like, oh, can we get back to inflation or energy crisis?
Yeah.
But it's very hard for other media then to ignore it, and they didn't. So you had Investigate magazine under Ian Wishart, because you have to say Ian Wishart's journalism skills, actually, he's got some considerable skill.
Didn't he make his name with the wine box?
He did, which is incredibly complex.
He's probably only one of about 5 people who could understand
who understood the wiring diagram, yeah. So you had the Tamahiri story. Poor David Parker got involved in some business story that he had to resign briefly, and then he came back to cabinet. There was a number of those stories that he pursued. And I guess it was similar really in the early, when blogs were big in the sort of late 2000s, early 2010s, you had whale oil. Now that was big too with Cam Slater. Now I know he's still sort of around the fringes, but he was powerful then, wasn't he?
It was very powerful. Well, I'm having to scratch my memory, because he was a very powerful figure, and from memory, there wasn't much known about the linkages, sort of to the beehive or whatever.
They were using that, weren't they? They were feeding him bits and pieces.
But I think that wasn't the connection made, because after a press gallery party, we'll have to double check this, but my memory was that after a press gallery party, there was a bit of a mess outside, sausages and cigarette butts or something, and he had a photo of it on his blog or something, having a bit of a crack at the gallery.
Certainly Judith Collins got in a lot of strife for being too close to him, and sort of a bit of a mutual arrangement that had gone on there. Possibly his biggest scandal was the Len Brown. Remember, he broke the Len Brown scandal, when Len Brown had an affair, and he'd just been elected for a second term, and Cam Slater came out with the story. Everyone else piled along with it. Do you remember? And
no, I do. Yeah.
Fell on a sword.
That was just a
just your classic
of your scandals.
Yeah.
It was sort of I'm trying to think what the council officers were involved.
Yeah. I think that was there was several unsavoury details that I won't go into there. But I did think it was interesting that while that trajectory towards greater scrutiny and disclosure has been quite consistent, it does wax and wane when you get either a magazine or a blog site, or just a particular media interest that's just really going to go after those stories, because once you put it out there, it's difficult for others to ignore.
Well, that comes to that point then about the Chris Hipkins story.
Yeah, and let's finish with it,
because
unpack that.
Part of there was obviously immense. It blew up online first.
Yes.
And then there becomes this immense pressure that the media, the mainstream media, feels like it has to acknowledge that there's something happening in the social media space, even though it doesn't really necessarily meet the tests that it would normally apply, and so it reports that something's been alleged but is not going to say what those allegations are. And then if people are presumably interested, they have to go and trawl away on Google somewhere to find it.
Yes, it's very
a strange situation.
It is a very strange situation. And then obviously when the leader himself makes himself available, and good on Chris Hipkins for fronting up to that. But at that point, you can't ignore it.
No, definitely not.
So, let's just finish with that. I mean, do you think it's done him any lasting damage?
No, I don't know. I don't think so. Time's a funny thing, isn't it? This news cycle moves so fast. The world moves so fast. We're in a suddenly we're in a war and a crisis, a real crisis, a serious crisis that's affecting New Zealanders. And I wonder if New Zealanders are like, oh, really?
Yeah, I suppose that's a good point. It's almost a bit of a luxury to indulge in those kinds of, and not, and I don't want that to be construed the wrong way, but I mean, in times where things are relatively normal and there's not a lot of news around, it's probably more likely than that sort of scandal will take hold when you have real world pressures coming in on you.
Had he failed to properly address it and deal with it, it might be still dogging him.
Mm.
But it seems to have died away, doesn't it?
Yeah, and possibly following some of our tips there before about, he probably dealt with it pretty well, didn't he? Be authentic, front up, and he gave a lot of interviews, as Shane Jones did with his stories, until people were kind of
That's right. You talk until you just keep going.
And just keep going. And don't give one media outlet the interview.
That's right.
Because everyone else is going to be upset with you and chasing you
then
around.
Makes it worse. Yeah, but it's interesting actually, isn't it? That would have happened in years gone by, and even in our era in the gallery, that someone would have done a little scoop. But not now, because they recognise that doesn't work.
Yeah. All right, there we go. So if nothing else, we've told the politicians how to deal with political scandal.
That's right.
Yeah. That's us for Context this week. We'll catch you next time.